All right, good evening, everyone. We're going to call the Monday, January 22nd, City of Urbana Council's Committee of the Whole Committee of the Whole meeting to order. The clerk, please call the roll.
City Council members Ammons.
Here.
Brown.
Here.
Hazen.
Here.
Jacobson.
Here.
Miller.
Here.
Roberts. Here. Wu.
Here.
Mayor Marlowe.
Here.
All right, will there be entertain a motion for the approval of the minutes of the previous meeting on January 8th, 2018?
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved by Miller, second by Jacobson. Any further discussion? Any corrections, Bill?
Nope.
All in favor say aye.
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 All opposed? Ayes have it. Any additions to the agenda? Seeing none, I'll move on to public input. I have two cards. One is from Bishop King James Underwood. He chooses not to address the members, but asks that his position be entered into the record as still being concerned about the Dr. Ellis subdivision sewer problem. And the next, at the time of the agenda, so we'll do that then. Anyone else would like to address the Committee of the Whole? All right, seeing none. Any presentations from staff? Seeing none. Staff reports. All right. Chief Morgan. No.
There we go. All right, so I just wanted to update you. We had made some 5 recent hires to the police department, and I just want to update you about that. Back in August, we hired 2 officers that just graduated from PTI in December, so they're currently in the field training program now. Paige Bennett is a 26-year-old white female. She's from Urbana, Illinois, and she is a University of Illinois graduate, has a master's in social work. She previously worked as a crisis responder for children with mental illness, and she also did an internship here at the police department during her social worker, getting her social worker degree at the university. The second female that was hired in August, she's a white female, 22-year-old from Champaign, Illinois. She graduated Olivet Nazarene University with a bachelor's in criminal justice, and she previously worked as an intern with the Kankakee County Public Defender's Office. And then just recently, last week, we hired 3 other officers, which would bring us to full strength at the police department. And they started attending the Police Training Institute today. The first one, Elizabeth Henry. She's a 32-year-old white female from Urbana, Illinois. She's a University of Illinois graduate and has a bachelor's in anthropology. She previously worked as a daycare provider here locally. The next one is Justin Walker. He's a 30-year-old black male. He is a University of Illinois graduate. He's from Urbana as well, has a bachelor's in anthropology. A bachelor's in political science. And currently teaches, well, previous to being employed here, teached at a Proviso area for exceptional students up in the Chicagoland area. I believe it was a program for troubled youth. And then the third one that was hired last week, Osric Hayes, is a 30-year-old black male. He is graduated Urbana High School. He resides in Champaign now, but he's a 30-year-old black male with a bachelor's in recreation management and kinesiology from Illinois State University. And previous to being employed here, he was a correctional officer at the Champaign County Jail. So like I said, that brings us up to full staff, and I just wanted to report on those. We've done had some really good luck in hiring some solid people that in the past few months.
Madam Mayor.
I just wanted to thank Liz Borman and Todd Rent and the HR department, as well as Chief Morgan and her staff, for making a tremendous effort in diversifying our police force and recruiting absolutely top-notch candidates. So I think our police force is looking more and more reflective of our own community, and I'm very, very happy with the progress we're making. And we've also are having the same success with our fire department as well. So And it's an intentional, a very, very intentional effort.
Jared? Mr. Miller?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Did I say here 2 Urbana natives? Or are they just living here now?
The way this, 1, 2, 3 are from Urbana,
3 are from Urbana?
correct?
Like native to Urbana?
Yes, that's my understanding.
Wow, that's awesome. And 1 from Champaign?
Yes,
And then 1 sound like from Northern Illinois?
yes.
From up DeKalb. And are they all going to be Urbana residents as members of the police force? Do they live here now?
No, not that I'm aware of. I know that 2 of them currently live in Urbana. One, I don't know where he's going to end up. He's coming from up north. And then the other one, two of the others live in Champaign.
Okay. Oh, let's see you communicate anyway.
Yes.
Thank you.
Well, any other comment? Mary Alice? Excuse me, Council, Alderwoman Wu, Alderperson Wu. Want to make sure I
I'm
don't
just
get
wondering
sued.
now with these new hires, based on what the mayor had said, and also just based on what I'm hearing, it sounds like the diversity in our pool is becoming much larger. I'm wondering if we can get an update at some time, the numbers, a percentage of females, a percentage of different minorities on our police force.
So I know that brings us to 10 females, which is the most females we've ever had on the police department. It's about 17% of the force. That'll bring us to 4 African-American males. I did not do a percentage on that, I'm sorry. We do have 2 Hispanic males as well. One of our females is an African-American as well. I might be forgetting somebody off the top of my head. I didn't bring but I can bring you a updated roster.
Just a little table.
Yep.
Awesome, thank you.
Anyone else? So I certainly would echo the comments of the appreciation for the department beginning to reflect the demographics of the community. Certainly the intentional effort is appreciated. I think the community would appreciate that quite a bit. It would be nice to see them at tomorrow's City of Urbana Human Relations Office traffic stop discussions, which will take place tomorrow, Tuesday, January 23rd. From 5:30 to 6, there will be a casual buffet dinner that will be available. And then there's going to be a conversation about traffic enforcement from 6 to 8 p.m. There'll be a presentation, and then there'll be a discussion about that. So that'll be at the Urbana Civic Center. We're encouraging all the citizens to come out in Urbana, Champaign area. Madam Mayor, did you have something?
Yes.
Yeah, go
I
ahead.
wanted to let people know this is facilitated by Vasilia Clark and Preston James, and that it's focused on the community's experience with traffic enforcement in the city of Urbana. We're focused on what the experience is within our community.
So intentionally, the police officers are not coming to that to make sure that everybody feels comfortable saying whatever they would like to say, and that I have intentionally not instructed anybody to go or asked anybody to go. And
Okay.
the ones that are in PTI anyway, they don't have evenings free a lot of the times anyway. But yeah, that's kind of the way we were viewing that, to make sure everybody felt free to speak.
Go
And this meeting is noticed as an open meeting, so council members, please feel welcome to attend, and there will be no TV cameras or recordings made either. But we will take copious notes.
So I would certainly say thank you again for your update and for the presentation, the diversity. I do think that we just heard where 2 officers are going to be living in the city of Champaign. So, and there are people who live in the city of Champaign who get stopped by Urbana police officers. So I know we're trying to get an experience of what it looks like or what it feels like in Urbana. But are we saying it's not open to individuals who live in Champaign?
It's open to individuals who live in Champaign, but we're wanting to focus on what their experience is within the city of Urbana,
Urbana,
because that is the only jurisdiction in which we actually have control over the actions of the law enforcement community.
No,
So-
that clarifies it. I
So
was
yes,
just-
everyone's welcome. Everyone's welcome to participate. And yeah, because we know half the people who are stopped in Urbana don't live in Urbana. But we want to focus on the experience within the city of Urbana.
Absolutely. So that'll be 6 to 8 p.m. tomorrow at the Urbana Civic Center. You are welcome to come and share your experiences if you were stopped by the Urbana Police Department. All right? All right. So any other staff reports? All right. Seeing none, we'll move on to resolution number 2018-01-003R, a resolution authorizing acceptance of an Illinois Arts Council Agency, IACA, grant for public arts program operating support, FY 2018, Urbana Arts Program, Community Development.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
For those of you who might not know me, this is my first time in front of the council, so I'll introduce myself. My name is Rachel Storm, working now as the Public Arts Coordinator for the City of Urbana. So I get to come tonight with joyful news, which is that we received a grant from the Illinois Arts Council in the amount of $4,600. The Illinois Arts Council is a state agency. It provides support, operating and technical budgetary support for arts programs throughout the state. And it works to keep the arts sector vital, vibrant, and accessible for all. This is an unrestricted program grant, so it will support our operating budget. There's no clear expenditures for this grant. It will go into supporting our existing programs, many of which you're probably familiar with, but things like our Art at the Market programs and Art in the Square, our Artist of the Corridor exhibits. There's one up right now that you might have passed on your way in tonight. Things like our upcoming programs. We have a Young Artist Studio program coming up with the Urbana Free Library. But quite a number of things that we operate regularly, and that will go to support those programs. So in general, this is the process of simply asking for your acceptance of this grant, and we recommend that you approve it and approve the resolution authorizing its acceptance.
Is there a motion?
I'll move that we push resolution number 2018-01-003R, resolution authorizing acceptance of an Illinois Arts Council Agency grant for public arts program operating support for fiscal year 2018 forward to the full council for approval.
I'll second it.
It's been moved by Mr. Miller, second by Mr. Hazen. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The ayes have it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ordinance number 2017-12-069, an ordinance to repeal Urbana City Code Chapter 24, Article 4, Section 24-100, Champaign-Urbana Cable and Telecommunications Commissions, IT.
Hello.
Good evening, gentlemen.
Good evening. I think we win the award for the longest title.
Yes, you do.
Keep going, yeah.
So we came before council, the committee, a month ago with a proposal to repeal the Cable and Telecommunications Commission. And at the time, there was some discussion, and we were asked to come back with additional options. So Jason had a good suggestion for an alternative scenario, which we have now laid out in the memo that we've put before you. The original option on the table is just to repeal the commission, and we've added a few details underneath that option. Something that staff were already doing was when there are complaints about the cable, and we act as a sort of last resort for complaints about channels or lineups or other specific issues, or even regarding how cable was laid across someone's yard. We have been forwarding those on to our contacts at the cable companies, and we will continue to do that. There will not be any change in that process. The other item that was brought up as one of the aspects of the Cable Commission was to inform council on various topics. And after some discussion, really what this ultimately boiled down to is there's nothing that prohibits citizens from coming before council and briefing you on any topic that seems appropriate. So we are not in any way precluding that. People can come forward, they can choose topics, they can brief you as they see fit. So that ability will not go away if we repeal the commission. The other alternative that we put out there is to take the few remaining functions of the Cable Commission and give them to the UPTV Commission. There is a note here. There are 3 people from Urbana who are our commissioners who sit on both of those commissions. So the 3 Urbana representatives are the same for the Cable Commission and for the UPT Commission. There are some Cable and Telecommunications Commission members who are not representing Urbana, who are not on the Urbana Public Television Commission. So that would have to be a discussion about moving those responsibilities over. But really, when we boil it down, the only specific functions that the Cable Commission performs at this point are to accept yearly reports from the cable companies and put those on file, and to collect information from the PEG channels, assemble that, and provide that as an annual report. So those are two very straightforward functions that could easily be performed by the UPT Commission if we deem them necessary to continue it all. So with that being said, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Brown?
So last time, I think City of Champaign was also considering some kind of resolution to do similar to what we were doing. Did they take any action?
No, they did not. I think Champaign is waiting to see what this council does, and will follow afterwards.
Okay, and then the PEG channel stats that the Cable Commission is currently producing, that is PEG channel from Champaign and Urbana?
As well as UI7 and
So all of
Parkland.
them.
Yeah. And those stats are essentially how many, actually, I brought a copy of the most recent annual report. It's essentially sort of tables. The details are not as important, but it's sort of tables of numbers of how many programs and hours were provided during that time period.
Does that break down, say, how many people watch it over Comcast cable versus watch it online versus YouTube and things like that?
It does not. We don't have any specific numbers on any of our cable providers. Comcast provided us a number of years ago with the most specific, just telling us how many subscribing households, or UPTV in our case would be available to. But we don't have any specific Nielsen type ratings of how many people are watching in a specific time.
But you can get that through people watching on the website or through YouTube? Do you?
We know how many views have occurred on YouTube. We don't know how many people that is, of course.
Okay.
Could be the same people watching that over and over.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions? Mr. Roberts?
Yeah, so I like the idea of continuing some of the data collection resources and reporting as a UPTV Commission assignment. Therefore, we would have some of the work done by the commission that you're dissolving still linger and be a resource to the community. So that would be the. So I guess the motion that would come from that would be that I move that we repeal the Urbana City Code, Chapter 24, Article 4, Section 2410 of the Champaign-Urbana Cable Telecommunications Commission, but reserve the functions relating to the reporting and statistic collection of that commission and assign it to the UPT Commission.
Is there a second?
I'll second that motion.
It's been motioned by Mr. Roberts, and seconded by Mr. Miller. Further discussion? I think Mary Alice was first. Alderwoman Wu.
So I'm certainly not opposed to this idea of taking some of the utility of the existing cable commission and moving it into this commission for allocation of better resources and time of people. My question is, what's before us right now is all about the composition of the board and how it would change, right? So it talks about the number of members who would be, and when their terms would expire and so forth. But what I don't see in here is anything that talks about the functions that would be moved in. Is that something that would be included in this resolution, or is this, or sorry, ordinance? Or is that something that would be put somewhere else? I don't know who that is an appropriate question for.
I'll start. I do not believe that the ordinance identifies the functions of the commission. I think those more grew over time.
Okay.
If there is language, we will revisit it and modify that, but I do not believe that was written into the ordinance, at least as far as I've seen.
So just to be, I guess what I'm trying to figure out is where are and maybe this is what you were going to say, Diane, where the roles and the functions of the different commissions are housed under.
Yes, the cleanest way to approach this is what's been recommended, and that is to repeal the Cable Commission ordinance, so that the Cable Commission no longer exists. It's, the functions of it as a commission are obsolete, as was noted in the memo. It takes 8 to 10 hours staff time every quarter to staff that meeting. City of Champaign no longer supports it. They don't provide any staff time. And in a conversation today, it's clear that the cleanest way to do this would be to first of all, repeal the Cable Commission. And then if you want to add specific functions to what the UPTV Commission is, that could be a separate action. But if you focus right now on just repealing the Cable Commission, ending that, that would be the cleanest way to do this. Does that make sense?
Yes and no. I guess what I'm, perhaps a better way of asking the question is, where does that live? Where do the roles and responsibilities of the different commissions, where does that, if it doesn't live here, which is fine, I just want to know where it does reside.
Well, it would live, the roles of the UPTV Commission
Yes.
would live with the ordinance that created the UPTV Commission, which is a separate ordinance.
So we would, so it almost seems like there's two ordinances here. A, we need to dissolve, if the council agrees to dissolve this specific commission, but B, to
The
then.
future intent would be to modify the ordinance for the other commission, if there's specific things you wanted in it. The reporting requirements, I assume, is what?
I mean, absolutely, the reporting requirements, I'm a little interested in terms of bringing issues to council that are important to the community in regards to cable and internet and so forth, federal, state rules that could be impacting residents. So those are the things that I'm also interested in including. All right.
Yeah, so
Councilmember Jacobson.
So it looks to me, I'm on the website of the Public Television Commission, and it looks to me as though their mandate would need to be broadened to do the things that I'm gathering might be indicated. So I guess I am very happy to follow the recommended course of action and divest ourselves or remove ourselves from the existing Cable Commission, but would really invite a suggestion from you at some future time for a broader mandate for UPTV Commission.
Mr. Miller was next, then I'll come back to you, Madam Mayor.
As a, to Councilmember Wu's question, I think the motion purely for us is two parts: in one, dissolving, and in second, directing staff to change the UPTV Commission to include the scopes of the things that we're talking about moving over. That'll have to be a separate ordinance. I'm assuming. We only have one ordinance before us.
Yeah, right. Yeah, the second part of what I said is just a request to the mayor to request the staff to bring that back to us.
So where we are right now, Mr. Clerk, could you clarify for us, please?
yeah, there's a motion from Mr. Roberts to, I assume, send this repealing ordinance to council with a recommendation for approval.
I'm sorry, I
And he
didn't
has
define that, but it's
and
true.
he's stated that he also wants to direct, you could clean up the language a little bit and direct staff to do part two, which is to bring to council, or bring to committee recommended changes to the UPTV Commission to incorporate the additional roles.
So
Oh, sorry.
from a legal standpoint, we can, if before us is the recommendations to repeal an ordinance, we can tie those other stipulations to a repeal of an ordinance without a problem?
I'm not sure what you mean by without a problem. You have an ordinance, a proposed ordinance, and like any other ordinance or resolution for that matter, because you're in committee, you can amend it. and then move it on to the council with amendments. For instance, if you're looking strictly to abolish the Cable Commission, you can just decide to approve Section 1. If you want the other changes that are provided here regarding the composition of the UPTV Commission, you can approve those. I was not involved in drafting these additions. I was involved in the recommendation to terminate the Cable Commission because its work has been pretty well subsumed by state and federal law. But you certainly, there are, the informative aspects, and of course, for instance, open access internet and all issues are coming up. And somebody, probably for the community, should be amenable to addressing those issues.
Well, I just wanted to
Those
make
types
sure
of
that-
questions you can either put in here, if you have a list of them that the council or the committee wants to include, or you can do it by a second ordinance, which IT services can draft, or I can draft.
Okay, I just think we're making this more complicated than it needs to be, right? But go ahead, Madam Mayor, please.
Well, just to sum it up, what you're doing here is essentially breaking up with Champaign so that there's no longer a joint cable commission with the city of Champaign, and then Urbana can do whatever it wants with regard to functions of the UPTV commission.
So I was just trying to make sure that the motion was clear. There was no complications with the motion itself. We vote yes on this particular motion, then we have divorced Champaign, and then we a friendly divorce, amicable divorce with Champaign. And then we can reallocate our resources back to UPTV. All right, so that everybody understands what the motion is? All right. All right. So all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Ayes have it. Thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate it. Ordinance number 2018-01-002, an ordinance authorizing the jurisdictional transfer of a certain highway from Somer Township to the city of Urbana, a portion of Lincoln Avenue from Centennial Farm Road to Olympian Drive. Public Works.
Thank you. The action before you tonight is consideration of a jurisdictional transfer or a road ownership, if you will, from Somer Township to the city of Urbana. This is the north 1/3 mile of Lincoln Avenue that was recently completed. And this was anticipated in the intergovernmental agreement, which is attached, and it's the paperwork involved of a jurisdictional transfer agreement, which would be sent to IDOT once both parties sign it. So this is our commitment we made back in 2011 to take over ownership of this piece of the roadway.
Any questions? Councilmember Wu.
I'd like to make a motion to move ordinance number 2018-01002, an ordinance authorizing the judiciary transfer of a certain highway from Somer Township to the city of Urbana to the council for recommendation of approval.
All second.
It's been moved by Alderperson Wu, second by Alderperson Miller. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The ayes have it. Ordinance, moving on to ordinance number 2018-01-003, an ordinance granting consent to assign certain agreements for use of right-of-ways legal.
Yes.
Is this a double ordinance? Is that what you're looking at?
Actually, it's an ordinance authorizing consent because the original consents were given by ordinance. But in any event, as we all know, Presence is selling and closing on their sale to OSF of the present medical center facilities. We have 3 agreements, 2 of which require city council approval. I've recommended that all 3 be approved, even though the second one doesn't require, or one of the 3 does not require consent, but this will clarify that and establish a record to assure that the new owner has the consent. One of them is the Sky Bridge. Another is a protrusion over a walkway. And to be honest, at this point, I don't recall what the third one is. But this is routine.
Any questions? All right, is there a motion?
I'll move that we send ordinance number 2018-01-003, an ordinance granting consent to assign certain agreements for use of right-of-ways forward to full council with recommendation for approval.
Second.
It's been motioned by Councilmember Miller, second by Councilmember Roberts. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Ayes have it. Resolution number 2018-01-002R, a resolution approving an agreement with the Illinois Department of Transportation for construction and maintenance of a shared use path, Cunningham Avenue from Kenyon Road to Napleton Way. Public Works.
Thank you. Council members may recall last May, this item was up for discussion, but just as a little background, IDOT plans to resurface Cunningham Avenue from the 5 Points University Avenue intersection up to Interstate 74. One thing that we had identified with them that they agreed to include on their plans was a shared use path from Kenyon up to Napleton Way. This is very much needed because we have a lot of pedestrian bicycle activity in that area, which many times are literally walking on the street, which is very unsafe. IDOT is willing to pay, along with some federal dollars, the majority of the costs, but our share is $180,000. Staff has identified TIF $4 to fund this, so this is in that TIF 4 district, so this is able to match or use our local share to match the IDOT share, and this construction is scheduled for this calendar year, so the letting is in March. So it's timely that we consider this agreement as I need to get, hopefully, a signed copy up to them after the council meeting, if it's so recommended for approval.
Councilmember Roberts.
Yeah, thanks. What a great accomplishment to get this side path finally approved by IDOT, something that we've been waiting for quite a long time. And that they would conclude that with a maintenance upgrade of the road itself is very excellent. So I doubt that anybody will be hesitant to support this. So I move Resolution 2018-01-002R, a resolution approving an agreement with the Illinois Department of Transportation for the construction and maintenance of a shared use path, Cunningham Avenue from Kenyon Road to Napleton Way, to the City Council with approval.
Second.
It's been moved by Alderman Roberts, second by Alderman Jacobson. Any further discussion? Alderman Brown.
Yeah, I know this is one we talked about where you can actually see the footpath that people are using, so it's obvious that we need something there. I was curious about the 10-foot width. Is that what we have farther down on Cunningham? Is that something that's required by the state? Is that typical?
Further south is 8 foot wide. This is 10 foot wide. And there was I forget the exact reason why we couldn't go 10 feet further south. I want to say it was a definition matter of a shared use path versus a wide sidewalk. And along with that, I think there was some maybe geometric issues that we had. I forget the exact reasons, but we could only go to 8 foot further south, unfortunately.
Okay, so we go for 10 feet if we can for multi-use paths?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Bill, you used the term letting. Could you explain what that is?
Oh, it's a bid opening.
Bid opening.
So a bid opening is in March. So IDOT would open bids from contractors for the work.
Okay, thank you. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Ayes have it. Moving on to ordinance number 2018-01004, an ordinance amending the zoning ordinance of the City of Urbana, multifamily parking, residential setback calculations, community development.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you. So as you may recall, back in December, planning staff, well, it was me, I came before you with a series of proposed text amendments to the zoning ordinance. And after some discussion, the City Council asked to forward 2 of those items to the Committee of the Whole. So that's what I'm here to discuss tonight. And just as a refresher, those 2 items were a proposed reduction in the amount of required parking for single-bedroom apartments, and there was a proposed clarification to how required setbacks in residential zoning districts are calculated. So for the first proposed change, another way to state that is that we would be creating a uniform parking requirement for multifamily residential buildings. And to take a step back and explain where this request came from, this is an outgrowth of a survey that we had done in 2017, which we called the Multifamily Campus Area Parking Study. I believe it's in Exhibit D of your memo, or Exhibit, yeah, I think it's D of your memo. There's a summary of that parking study. I've also got it in a little presentation here as well. So what was this? This was, as the name suggests, a survey of multifamily residential buildings near campus. More specifically, it was bound by essentially Pennsylvania Avenue on the south, Vine Street on the east, University Avenue to the north, and then all the way to Wright Street to the west. Of course, there's a lot of the actual campus in a lot of that area. And then the reason that we did this is we really wanted to understand the parking supply that we have on the ground in that area, and then the parking demand, so how much parking was being used by people that live in that area. And we contacted 272 property owners or managers, and some of them we contacted again and again. And at the end of it, we got 187 responses, which represented about a 70% response rate. And it was conducted by the planning staff, and then we did have a lot of helpful property owners and managers. So there's a map. It's kind of hard to see everything that's going on there, but the dark gray stuff that represents properties that returned surveys. The lighter gray blocks are properties we tried to get data for, but for whatever reason didn't receive results back from those. And what we found is that out of the total parking supply that is there, 98% of it was off-street. There was a small percent of on-street parking permits that had been purchased by residents of the buildings in the study. And then in terms of demand, only about 75% of spaces were being used by residents of the area. Non-residents were leasing 9% of the spaces, and then 15% of spaces were unused. So this slide just sums up a little bit of that. I think a couple important numbers on this slide are that we found the number of parking spaces per bedroom that were leased to residents was less than 0.5. So we found 0.42 across the board, which is less than the 0.5 that we require for most multifamily units, except of course for single bedroom units we require a full 1 space per unit. So there were 386 surplus parking spaces, and that again represents that 15%. So to come back to the current issue at hand, in your memo, we tried to summarize some main points for why we're requesting this change. So I'll just go through those briefly and then take those one at a time. The first one is that the current requirement for single bedroom apartments is too high. One bedroom or one parking space per per unit or per bedroom, it's the same thing in that case, is too high. Number 2 is that buildings with both single and multiple bedroom units have nearly identical parking demand to buildings that only have multiple bedroom units. So that suggests that the residents in single bedroom units in those buildings they don't have any higher demand than people just in multi-bedroom units. The third point is that it's more costly to provide single-bedroom apartments in areas where demand for them is highest. That would be near campus for the most part. Number 4 is that most demand for on-street parking is not caused by residents of single-bedroom apartments. And the last point is that if we were to reduce the minimum parking requirement, it would not reduce the amount of parking that's provided in areas where parking is needed, because it's setting a minimum and not a maximum of the amount of parking you could provide. Okay, so as I said, the current requirement is 1 space per unit for single-bedroom apartments, and that really makes it so it costs more money and uses up more land to provide parking for the same number of tenants in single-bedroom units as in multiple-bedroom units. The proposed change would remove the extra cost and the disincentive to build single-bedroom units by requiring a uniform rate of half a parking space per bedroom in all multifamily residential buildings. Okay, so on to those main points. The first one is that the current parking requirement for single-bedroom apartments is too high. We'd expect that if the demand for parking met met the required supply, because essentially a minimum parking rate is setting a required supply. So we'd expect if demand met that supply, it would be around 1-to-1, a 1 space to 1 bedroom ratio. What we found is that out of 55 apartment buildings that only have single bedroom units, less than half have an observed demand of 1-to-1. Here's a graph that shows that. Sorry, the numbers there are kind of tiny. It's also in your memo on page 2. But what we'd expect to see, so on the left you have your parking demand, and then all of these lines, all of the columns represent apartment buildings. So if the parking demand is 1-to-1, that's anything that's meeting this line up here. So you do have 25 buildings where the demand does match the requirement, but then everything that doesn't meet that line is essentially we're requiring too much parking for those buildings, and that comes to a total of 239 spaces, or an oversupply of 40%. If you want to monetize that, that's about $700,000 of excess parking that we are requiring people to install.
Kevin, can I ask a question on that one?
Sure.
So when the lines go to the very top on the right there, is that because most apartment owners don't offer more than 1 space per apartment, per 1 bedroom?
Let's see.
Like almost half of it is maxed out at 1, basically, and I suspect that would keep going up if they offered more spaces, but instead they're using the street.
Yeah, actually for this, well, they would either be using the street or they'd be exactly meeting demand.
And it looks like, I didn't notice it before, but at the bottom you can see whether residents pay for parking or not, and it looks like almost all of them that max out are free. Is that right?
Yeah, it is, and I kind of threw that in because we did ask the question of whether residents had to pay above the rent that was charged. So I just threw that in because I thought it might be interesting to see, and then I think when you actually see it, it is interesting that, hey, if you charge people for the parking space, then they're
less likely to use it.
Less likely to use it.
Yeah.
I think there's probably a bit of self-selection here, though, in that, say, if I own a car, I might go to a place where parking is included in rent, right? So not everything can be explained by, yeah.
Okay.
I just want to throw that out there because
Okay.
that is a possibility.
Thanks.
So, I don't know who was first, but Councilmember Jacobson.
Well, just to follow a little bit along the line that I believe Bill was, perhaps some of these single bedrooms are occupied by couples who may own 2 cars.
Mhm.
So, but that's not taken into account in calculating your average of .62.
Well, it would be because we don't cap it at 1. So these, I think, so there are in the mixed unit buildings, there were a couple that went beyond 1, and I'll get to that in a second, but I can briefly go to those. So there were 3, if you look at the far top right, there were 3 that were more than 1 space demanded per unit. But I don't think in the single bedroom, out of all the single bedroom ones, we found any that were greater than 1.
Okay.
The person, woo.
I just want to be sure I understand what this graph is telling us. So each bar represents an actual property, is that correct?
That's correct.
So there's 55 bars in the single unit bedrooms.
Yes.
So if I just count, which is what I was doing, I was counting up the number of bars that are above and below the line, that would give me the exact number.
Yes, you
Buildings
can.
that meet that, right?
Yeah. So. Right.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'll have other questions, but I just wanted to make
Okay.
sure before you moved on that I was interpreting that correctly. Thank you.
Yeah.
Please continue.
Thank you. But good questions. Thank you. Okay. So then. Okay, so there were 25 that met, that were right at the 1-to-1 ratio, but that means that there were 30 that were below. Yes, sorry, step back for a second. It was there's oversupply. That's the point. Okay, number 2. In mixed unit buildings, so when we look at buildings that have both single and multiple bedroom units, we find that the demand in those buildings is almost identical by a matter of just a couple of decimal places. It's almost identical to buildings with only multiple bedroom units. So as I stated in my opening, we would expect that if occupants of single bedroom units were actually creating higher demand for parking spaces, we'd expect these numbers to be different in some fashion. But we find that they're pretty much the same. And if you look at, I think it's pretty illustrative if you look at the 2 graphs on page 3 of your memo. The trend for both mixed units and for multi-bedroom units only, it follows a pretty similar pattern. And there's really not a whole lot of difference that you can see between the 2 of those. And I have those here as well. I added a little bit to this graph because I did want to have some representation of single bedroom units. So the lighter gray bars on here represent the percentage of the building that single bedroom units occupy. So it's not necessarily saying exactly that's how much demand they represent, because we don't know. In a given building, all the spaces could be in demand by only residents of single bedroom units or by only residents of multi-bedroom units. That we just don't know, but we do know the percentage of each building that is occupied by single bedroom units. So in any case, when you compare this graph, which is the mixed unit graph, to the following graph, you see a pretty similar trend line. And I think it's interesting because there are a lot of units that are below our requirement. There are a lot of units that are above our requirement. So 0.5 is probably pretty reasonable. We still do have sort of excess parking in both cases. But again, the main point is that if occupants of single bedroom units were demanding more parking, we would expect to see an observable difference between the two, and we're really not seeing that. And when you just look at the aggregate numbers, like on page 4 of your memo, the table at the top shows the demand per bedroom in aggregate, and mixed unit buildings have a demand of 0.4 spaces per unit, and multi-bedroom units or multi-bedroom buildings have 0.41. So it's basically the same demand in both types of buildings.
Just a second, Kevin, Alderman Jacobs.
Yeah, there's something really weird about this, or if I'm understanding it correctly, which is at the bottom end of the graph, the lower left.
Yeah.
You've got some apartment buildings that are using fewer than less than 20% of the space they have available, because they're all required to have 0.5 spaces per bedroom.
Right.
And some of them have over 80% of that empty. Does that seem reasonable or plausible?
I think so, because when you look, and unfortunately I can't share all of the data, because we told the owners and managers that we would keep the numbers, that we wouldn't share those publicly, because they had things in there like how much they charge for parking and number of spaces and all that. But there are extremes at both ends. So I don't know. We looked over the data pretty thoroughly many times, and anything that didn't seem reasonable, we asked for clarification. So I'm very confident that these numbers are representative of what's actually on the ground, but I don't know about every case.
So if you went, for example, to any of these that are at the bottom, where you're at 0.1, or between below 0.1 or between 0.1 or 0.2, you should be able to take a picture of their parking space, and it would be almost completely empty.
That's correct.
Is it possible, preserve their confidentiality, but do that? See if those things are really, because they're going to bring the average way down. The ones that are up at the top, that means their parking spaces are full. That may be reasonable.
Right.
But the ones at the bottom, I just don't believe that if you provide parking for all these folks, that their parking spaces are going to be practically empty. I've never seen a situation like that.
Alderman Brown.
Did you take occupancy into consideration, try to normalize it all for occupancy if some of these apartments are only half full?
No, we didn't ask. We did not ask about their occupancy rates. So part of what we were trying to do was to create a survey that we would get back with results.
Yeah.
So we
that's
kept it to, we initially had, I think, 12 questions, and we pared that down to 7. And then we were able to derive some of the data that we wanted out of the original 12 from those 7 questions.
Okay.
So
Thanks.
we kept it brief, and we got a good response. So we're happy about that.
Please continue.
Okay, so the third main point is that the current requirement makes it more costly to provide single-bedroom apartments, especially in areas where demand for them is the highest. So that would be areas where the land values are the highest, so areas near campus. And then additional costs of those parking spaces would get passed along to tenants, usually whether or not they use the parking spaces or not. So parking is expensive. Even low estimates put a surface parking space at about $2,500 to $3,000 per parking space for a surface space. Structured parking in garages gets really expensive. A very low estimate is $20,000 for a parking space in a garage. But so the current requirement makes developers spend twice as much to provide, to build a unit or build a bedroom for somebody in a single bedroom unit as it does for a person in a multi-bedroom unit. And some of those costs you can pass on to tenants in the form of higher rents or in parking fees, as we see about half of the units charged for parking, half of them include that, they roll that into the rent. But really parking doesn't pay for itself. So back in 2013, City of Champaign did a similar exercise to what we're asking for here. They had the same parking requirements that Urbana currently has for single bedroom units. And when they approached their council to ask that that be reduced to half a space per unit, they quoted one of the local developers that they had surveyed as part of their process. And the developer said that to break even, parking rent would need to be at least $2,000 per year. And he said that, he or she said that was double the highest rates that they were currently seeing. That also is about double the highest rate that we saw in our study, which was just under $1,000. So the Champaign staff explained this by saying that parking is a net financial loser, and in order to cover the cost of parking, the cost of providing required parking, university district landlords must raise apartment rents for all tenants, regardless of their parking needs. So by not building one-bedroom apartments, developers are able to at least minimize their need to shift parking costs onto non-parking residents.
Alderman Roberts has a question.
Yes.
If I can, if I can speak, I don't know if I can. All right, go down lower. I was reading in the News Gazette an article about the parking garage costs at M1 in downtown, and it was there that I read that the estimated cost for constructing a parking spot was very high, $200,000, and that therefore the parking rent had to be very high, which was the figure that you're proposing. So I'm wondering, are these costs that you estimate for parking based on constructed parking garages or macadam ground level parking?
So the cost for the cost estimate we use for surface parking is $3,000, and that's based on national data. And then for structured parking, we'd be talking about at a minimum $20,000. But earlier when I said, that the excess supply of parking cost about $700,000, that was using a low surface estimate of $3,000 per space.
Okay.
Okay. I do want to point out that also in locations that aren't near campus, there still might be a desire to build apartments, to build apartment buildings with single bedroom units where they really don't require one space per bedroom. So if we think about buildings that cater to older folks, to people who take public transit, to people with disabilities, our current requirement of one space per bedroom is really a disincentive to providing that type of housing for people who might want it or need it, and also for developers who want to build it. Because just in terms of affordability, if it's going to cost twice as much to build a single bedroom unit, then you're going to have to pass that cost on, as I just explained. Okay, on to the next point. is that most of the demand for on-street parking is not caused by residents of single-bedroom apartments. So there is a concern, and I think a valid concern, because on certain blocks, there is a problem with on-street parking. There's more demand than supply. But looking at the data that we have available, which is in the West Urbana neighborhood, which requires parking permits for residents if you want to park on the street, looking at the available data from last year, we found that for residents of all types of apartment buildings, they only accounted for about 28% of the demand for the on-street parking permits last year. And then a subset of that 28% is going to be your residents of single-bedroom apartments. We know for sure that 9 of the, that 9 of 54 on-street parking permits that were purchased by residents of buildings that we surveyed, so 17% of those were purchased by residents in single-bedroom apartments. Another 33 permits, so 61% of the total 54 that were in the survey, were purchased by residents in mixed-unit buildings. So we're not sure if those were people living in single-bedroom units or not. But even if we were to assume that all of them were in single-bedroom units, you're still looking at about 80% of the total that we looked at. And when you factor in that only 28% of all on-street permits are being pulled by people who live in apartments, with the rest being made up by people living in fraternities and sororities. You can follow along with me on page 5 of your memo. People who own homes in the neighborhood or people who rent homes in the neighborhood. When you look at all of those, it seems like there's demand for on-street parking is coming from a variety of users, not just from people in single-bedroom units. And if we're trying to solve a problem with on-street parking, there are probably more direct methods to address the issue than by not reducing, or than by keeping the parking requirement at one space per bedroom just for the people in single-bedroom units. Okay, my last point on the parking reduction piece is that reducing the minimum parking requirement would not reduce the amount of parking provided in areas where more parking is needed. Like many things, parking it's a market, and if there is a market, say, for apartment buildings with more parking spaces out sort of towards the edges of town or out near the interstate, reducing the requirement is not going to make those developers provide less parking. They'd still be able to provide the parking that they would be providing anyway. So in conclusion, we feel that the current requirement is excessive and discourages developers from including one-bedroom units in new multifamily buildings. The proposed change would require half a parking space per bedroom in a multifamily residential building, regardless of the number of bedrooms in each unit. And we feel that the data from our parking study, from looking at on-street permits and elsewhere, that the data really support this change. Okay, so that's all for the piece on parking reduction.
Kevin, just for a
Yes.
moment, excuse me. Any further questions? Alderman Brown.
So there's probably some non-conforming apartments out there, either in houses or rooming houses, that aren't supplying the required spaces. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah, a lot of buildings were built before the current requirements.
So those would also show up. I'm still thinking about Eric's question about why some of those are so low. So they may have a low bar there, but they aren't really providing half a space. So they, especially since they're charging for parking, is what made me think about it. If they're charging, it's probably limited. So it might be those non-conforming cases that are charging for parking. There's not enough spaces, so they only have 20% available or something like that.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, thanks.
Good point.
Alderperson Wu.
So I was curious, as I was looking at the survey results that you had in number D, exhibit number D, you have we have a grayscale map here of
Yeah.
buildings, light gray and dark gray. So I'm assuming the light gray people are the ones that answered the survey?
It's
No,
the dark gray.
The
Yeah,
dark gray answered and the light gray did not.
that's correct.
So I noticed, I mean, I know several landlords, this is my neighborhood, so I know several landlords in this area, and their houses don't show up at all on here. So I'm curious how these were selected.
Yeah, so we looked at, so anything that was like a rental house is not included, because we're just looking at apartment buildings. So any apartment building over, I think it was over 3 units total, because there's some smaller.
Over 3, so not
Yeah.
3, because they're old houses that are divvied up.
Right.
Right, so
right.
I'm actually thinking of 2 properties that I'm aware of in my area. One that's built as an apartment building for 3 units, and one that was an old house that's been divvied up into 5, and neither one of them show up on here.
Yeah, and that was by design, since we're only looking at multifamily apartment buildings, and we weren't looking for old houses that were converted. There might be, like you said, there might be some of them that were, I guess, old 3 flats that may not have made it into the survey. So
I guess, and I can talk a little bit more about this as we go through discussion. My big concern here is that the numbers that we have here might not accurately represent the demand, and I do understand the rationale in terms of how you contacted different people in terms of providing it, but at the end of the day, what we want to know is what is the demand for a single apartment, like how many spaces do they need? So regardless if they are a big apartment building or a small apartment building, there's still demand there. To figure out what is the populace looking for when they're renting a place. So I'll talk a little bit about that, but I do have one other point of clarification. Talking about 343 off-street parking permits. How many on-street parking slots are available?
that is a good question. We haven't actually gone out and counted all those, so I'm not sure what that number is.
Okay, because if we would agree to decrease it to 0.5, and there were new buildings, then supposedly those excess or the unmet need would be pushed onto the streets. So without having that number, it's hard to know the impact of this. Okay, I have other things, but I'm going to hold them.
All right. Please proceed, Kevin.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so the second proposed change only has 2 main points, so it should go quicker than that first one.
All right.
Okay, so and I'll remind you because it's been a while since I talked about that second change. So the second change is would be to codify a long-standing practice to calculate average setbacks in residential zoning districts. And the 2 main points here are that this proposed change would be to clarify a long-standing practice, and the second point is that the result between calculating setbacks in the way that we've been doing for a long time and the alternative way that has been suggested, the difference between those two is really minor. So for a little bit of background, in most of our residential districts, the required front yard is variable, and it's calculated as the average of the setbacks of all the buildings on a block face, except that the average is capped with a minimum and maximum value. And pretty much, well, in every district except for R1, this minimum required setback is 15 feet, and the maximum is 25 feet. Currently, if there's a proposal to demolish an existing building on a lot, the zoning ordinance doesn't state explicitly whether the soon-to-be demolished building setback current setback should be used for the average calculation, or whether the calculation should be made as if that building were already demolished. So the proposed change would clarify how that setback is calculated. And we have a long-standing zoning ordinance interpretation from 1986 that instructed staff how to calculate that setback. And that said that in calculating the average setback, the setbacks for lots to be redeveloped where demolition is anticipated should be calculated at 15 feet. And since, as I mentioned, 15 feet was the minimum required in all residential districts except for R1 at the time, we're proposing a change that would state that we would just use the minimum front yard required in the district. Essentially what that would do is say it's got to be 15. You'd calculate it at 15 feet in every district, except in R1 you would calculate it at the minimum there, which is 25 feet. Okay, so point number one is that this is to clarify a longstanding practice. As I mentioned, has been how we've calculated these setbacks in these cases since 1986. And it would add language to the zoning ordinance to explain how the setbacks are calculated in cases where demolition is proposed. We feel that this would increase transparency. It would make the ordinance at least a little bit more understandable. It'd also save a bit of time and confusion, because I know at least a couple of times since I've been on staff, we've had to explain how that setback calculation is made, and it's, it can be confusing even on our end. So, okay, the second point is that the result between calculating the setbacks using this long-standing method and using the alternative method that's been proposed would be minor. So many of the communications that we received regarding the proposed change expressed a desire to maintain appropriate setbacks in residential districts, really to maintain the character of neighborhoods. And we feel that preserving character of neighborhoods is very important, but we don't feel that the proposed change would really have any effect on setbacks or neighborhood character. So as the chair of our Urbana Plan Commission observed at the meeting in December, he said that, and I'm paraphrasing, but the effect on determining the required setback for a lot by using the minimum setback rather than using the setback of an existing building is negligible, since setbacks are capped at 25 feet in most districts. So I provided tables 1 and 2 in your memo. They're hypothetical examples, but they're quite real examples of how the setback actually gets calculated. I can pull that up on the screen real quick so that people at home can follow along. Okay. So in the first example, say we have a lot that has five buildings on it. They're all set back 40 feet from the sidewalk. The way that if you were to use the setback of the existing building, say building 1's going to be demolished, in all these cases that's what we'll say, and it's going to be replaced with a new building. So in this first case here, if you calculate the setback, the required setback, using the existing setback, you get an average setback for the block of 40 feet, but since the setback is capped at 25 feet, you still get a required setback of 25 feet. That building is probably going to be built at 25 feet. If you calculate for that same block, if you calculate it in the way that staff has been doing for all these years, you would have the setback set at 15 feet, which is the minimum for that district, and then you weight, you add the weighted setback and add those up. You get an average setback of 35 feet But again, the required setback is capped at 25 feet, so the required setback in this case is exactly the same as in the first case. For an example, since the cap is 25 feet, we chose to use that as the example in Table 2. And again, doing the same calculations, you get pretty similar results. So the average setback in case number 1 would be an average setback, would be 25 feet. And then the required setback would also be 25 feet. In case number 2, there's a little variation. You get an average setback and a required setback of 23 feet. So that's a difference of 2 feet. That doesn't seem to be that extreme of a change. So there you have it. Okay, so to conclude, the proposed change wouldn't have any effect on how average setbacks are calculated by staff in cases where demolition of a building is proposed. It would simply add language to clarify how that calculation is done so that people reading the zoning ordinance would understand how these calculations are made. I do think, I want to add that it is, we feel it is a valid concern for people to want to maintain the character of their neighborhoods. And there are probably there are other ways that we could look at setbacks and neighborhood design that we could explore to help address these concerns. We just don't feel that that change in the way we calculate these setbacks in this case is really going to do much about the neighborhood character. So that concludes my report. So the City Council will have options in this case to approve the text amendments as presented, to approve the text amendments as modified by any suggested changes, or to deny the proposed text amendments. Staff would, the Plan Commission voted 6-1 to recommend approval to the City Council, and staff likewise recommends approval. I can take any questions you might have.
Alderman Miller.
Hey, Kevin, thanks for your great report on all of this stuff. Just so I get the gist and setback land of what it is that you're saying, the first example in the 40-foot setbacks, the entire point of adding the extra language as recommended by so many residents doesn't solve the problem of the fact that the average setback maximum is still only 25 feet, and therefore it doesn't really keep you from having a developer who doesn't care about the look of the neighborhood and wants to maximize their land value from still using that specific requirement. So really, if we wanted to get what I think residents are actually after in the zoning ordinance, we're actually going to need to adjust it to create some kind of different requirement for neighborhoods that have those kinds of setbacks, or it needs to be looked at more so than just the calculation. Do I understand that correctly?
That's correct, yeah.
Thanks.
All right. Alderman Jacobson.
If I understand the concern of the residents who wrote in, and I think I'm inclined to agree with them, is that the new construction should not jut significantly closer to the street than the existing construction. So a common sense way, it seems to me, to address that would be simply to say that the new construction should match the average setback of the existing buildings on the same block. Is that unfeasible or uneconomical, or why is that not reasonable?
I think that's a good question. I think it's one that we could explore if we wanted to look into this issue further. I don't know that I'd recommend just making that change without looking into it further, though.
I guess I'd like to see that possibility explored. What would be the, I think that most people believe that the urban aesthetic is best served by, a really very, maybe not exactly uniform, but relatively uniform setback along a block.
May I just add to his answer? Unless I misunderstood the question, I think you were asking why not measure it at the existing building before it's demolished?
No, not
Okay.
the existing building before it's demolished. All the other buildings that remain on the block.
Just with no cap, right? You're just saying, because right now we say it's the average, but then we add the cap of 25 feet. So you're just saying just to look at the average, right?
Yeah, because if everybody there, we had this in our neighborhood a long, long time ago because we were developed way below what the zoning said. And we wanted to retain the character of our neighborhood. And I think that this sort of has the same flavor as that, and I really feel for that because we went through that fight decades ago in our part of town. So I think we should really explore that, even if, because, it may be that we've got some lovely blocks that, whose cityscape, the blockscape, should be preserved.
Alderman Miller.
Just to support Mr. Jacobson's suggestion, I think that that's a wise thing to do, and perhaps maybe the original intention of it was just misinterpreted, and I think that the idea was right in that, if you have an average setback, let's say 35 feet, maybe it's perhaps that the ordinance should read that there's minimum, maximum based on the average setback on that block, not just in general 15 and 25 no matter where you are. Do you understand what I'm saying? That it turns into a range based on average setback versus it's always 15 and 25.
Yeah, I think, and I haven't looked at the history of the case when this was set as it is, but I think they were pretty clear that it would be capped at 15 and 25 feet, but I have no idea why.
Yeah, that's what's confusing to me. It's like, why would you make that very direct rule in such a diverse building area for all of your zones? Like, anyway. I think that when you're exploring Eric's idea and we're looking at it again, that maybe a range based on average and with the included language, of course, of including a structure that's going to be demolished in that calculation. That would be my suggestion.
Alderman Wu.
So it sounds to me like there's two different issues here right now. One is what happens if a building is going to be demolished or there's a vacant lot, how is that added into the calculation? So that's one. The second one is the 15 to 25 foot range, right? And I believe with Alderman Jacobson that any lot that is vacant or is set to be vacant should be counted as a missing data point, because at the end of the day, you want it to be in the character of that block face. So whatever's left standing is what it has to blend in with. So if that one property that you're demolishing is really out of whack in the other ones, then you're just going to continue the crazy look of that block face. But the second issue I think is interesting is the 15 to 25 foot. And I would like to hear the history of that, why we set that, or if it's just the rules that we had at the time.
Just on that point, that kind of change isn't something that we could bring as part of this text amendment because it is a significant change and would have to go back through the process of Plan Commission and City Council. So I didn't want to make a promise that we'll bring that back in time for council because we just can't do that.
All right. Alderman Roberts.
And I'm also wondering if there's public input on this from the public, but I support the comments that both Alderman Wu and Alderman Miller have concerns about altering the average setback of a block significantly, and that I believe that the current setbacks should match those of the other houses that are on the block. And that there often is a time when it's larger than 25 feet. So that seems arbitrary. I know that there's been a conversation in the past about areas near the campus or on busy streets that we are trying to promote infill urbanism, which suggests a favor for having large apartment buildings and mixed-use buildings to abut the sidewalk, because that's considered urban-style development. But I often wonder whether we are perhaps misguided by that, because even in the urbanized development where you're trying to bring retail or the building surfaces closer to the street, then what you're doing is minimizing potential parkway development. And landscaping along the street is at least as important as the presence of the retail to the sidewalk. And you can look at University Avenue development, and you can look to the left going west and see the Beckman Center with a beautiful avenue of trees, and you can look to the right and you can see the new construction, which is monolithic for 2 blocks, where there is no space, no green space between the building and the sidewalk. And I think that you have to consider, like, what is the better aesthetic for our community. But in the residential areas, this is even more important. And so I kind of reject the urban aesthetic to bring buildings to the street edge, and I prefer to see that neighborhoods show appropriate setback based on current conditions. Now, if there's already been a mix between inset and I mean, if there's been a variety of setbacks, and maybe an average setback is appropriate, but I think matching the current setback is often more appropriate to these residences. And if you only have 3 large buildings, it might be 3 apartment buildings on a block, or 3 large homes, and if you allow the setback for the new construction to come all the way to 15 feet from the sidewalk, you're alternating significantly the appearance of the block. You don't have 5 or 7 buildings to mitigate the setback by averaging it. So that becomes even more obtrusive. So if we're, I think it's probably appropriate to send this back to Planning Commission. I mean, if that's where these things have to originate. We may have had practice that allowed other things in the past, but we have an opportunity right here to correct it if we feel that this is no longer advisable. And so we may want to be splitting this motion or dividing the question so that we can proceed perhaps with the parking issue, but remove this from discussion until we have it more thoroughly explored.
Is that a motion?
Sure, I'll make a motion to divide the question.
I'll second that.
All right, yes. I just wanted to make sure we had a motion on the floor so we could move this along. All right, thank you, Kevin. We do have public input on this. Esther Pack.
Thank you. My name's Esther Pat. I live at 706 South Kohler at the corner of Kohler and Nevada in West Urbana. I also worked at the tenant unit at the University of Illinois until 5 years ago, and if anyone has questions about parking and landlords, I'm certain that I know more about it than anyone in the room. Please ask me. In 1976, that's how long ago it was, City of Urbana first created permit parking for the portion of West Urbana that's Green Street to Florida and Lincoln to Race, because at that time, 41 years ago, we already had a problem with the streets being congested due to, with parking due to insufficient parking spaces being provided for new construction of multifamily. That helped initially, but with each decade, the number of cars on the streets has increased. And I'd like to share with you my observations from where I live about parking spaces and apartments. On the 700 block of Nevada, just around the corner from my home, there are 28 units in multifamily housing, 22 of which are one-bedroom apartments. Last year, when there was a proposed development on Lincoln in Nevada, I went around and counted the number of places, just numbers of bedrooms, parking spaces, and number of off-street permits purchased on several different blocks. On the 700 block, there were 19 off-street parking spaces for 28 apartments. 9 people bought permits to park on street, and that's 28 cars for 28 bedrooms, a ratio of 1.0. At the building where I live, 706 Kohler, it's an owner-occupied co-op, but we have one-bedroom rental apartment. I've lived there 19 years, and we have rented to 9 single people and 1 couple. The couple had 2 cars, and 8 of the 9 single people had a car, including the current tenant, including one of them was a sophomore at the U of I. They've all been U of I students. This is 2 blocks east of Lincoln. So when I hear that, oh, fewer than 50% of tenants have cars, I don't believe it, and I don't think it's true, and I really think if you took the survey data that your staff did and eliminated Lincoln Avenue, everything Lincoln Avenue West, and maybe also eliminate the JSM apartments where you have to pay that $990 parking fee in full at the beginning of your lease, which is why JSM has empty parking spaces, I think you'd see a different story about what goes on in Urbana. Many of the one-bedroom apartments, and this might be part of it, in our neighborhood are leased to 2 people, and I don't think they are like married couples. I mean, they could be. I think they're just unrelated adults. I don't see the same name. You know, it's 2 different last names. 12 of the 22 one-bedroom apartments around the corner from me have 2 names on the mailbox, and that was not true 5 years ago. I think because rents are high, more people are doubling up, and just south of the new construction on Lincoln in Nevada, there are 16 one-bedroom apartments, and half of the apartments have 2 people in them. I'll also mention, I did a little survey for this thing last year, where I just went around the neighborhood and just blocks that were mostly apartment building because I didn't have the addresses of people with parking permits. I just had how many permits per block. And I found ratios of 0.52 to 0.67 on all of the blocks except the 700 block of Nevada where it was 1.0. And the speculation was because those were all 1 bedrooms. City staff's own survey. This is what really gets me. City staff's own survey of landlords, which was not complete. It doesn't include everything. They didn't get, they got 69% response rate. Even that, the city staff is telling you that right now, 0.62 is the ratio. Now, if you know that the need is 0.62, where's the rationale for dropping it to 0.50? Is that, no. Yeah, where's my clock? I don't know where I'm, also parking permit east of Lincoln, north of Green, actually everywhere except the area I described, it's impossible for any landlord to tell you how many parking spaces their building actually needs because they don't know. They only know how many they lease to their tenants. So in addition to, for example, JSM not knowing how many of the 45 one-bedroom tenants in the 45 one-bedroom apartments on Busey and Green actually are parking a car in the neighborhood somewhere, there's no way that any of the landlords of properties anywhere else that you surveyed really know how many cars their tenants have. All they know is how many tenants are renting from them. And I think if you would survey tenants, it really makes me mad when 3 out of 5 people in the city of Urbana are tenants, that you're talking about anything that affects tenants, but you won't talk to the tenants themselves. Landlords are not, they don't own their tenants.
1 minute, Ms. Pat.
Those are just their customers. And so I really wish you would survey tenants. I think if you want to change parking requirement, you can just skip the whole thing and leave things as they are. But if you want to change the parking requirement, if you surveyed tenants of one-bedroom apartments, you would find out what their actual parking needs are in terms of how many cars they have. I wouldn't be surprised if it came out to be less than 1.0 if you did the whole city, but I'm pretty sure it's going to come out to higher than 0.5. And I don't know if you can, but if you did a really good study, figured it out, and it turned out that you need 4 parking spaces for every 5 one-bedroom apartments, I don't know if you can do that in the zoning ordinance, but that makes sense to me. It makes a lot more sense than deliberately setting it below what is, slashing in half the required parking and saying it's not going to have a negative impact on parking congestion on the streets just does not make sense to me when you know that more than 1 out of every 2 people one out of 2 one-bedroom apartment has a need for parking. Do you have any questions? Yes, Bill. Oh, I'm sorry. You're supposed to do that. I'm sorry.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Alderman Brown.
Yeah. In the 700 block of Nevada, of those 19 off-street parking spots, were 10 of those 5 spaces that were double parked? Was that the one that had?
No, the double park, that's an 800 block of
that was a different
Iowa.
Okay.
Yeah.
But in this, okay, so in the 700 block, there were 19 off-street and 9 on-street. So we're already, the city's already kind of subsidizing the parking for those units, right? Because they aren't providing enough. They would have to provide more than 19, even under our current ordinance.
If you want, I mean, considering, you know, do you consider the city subsidizing the parking for a homeowner who has 2 cars but a 1-car garage and parks on the street? I mean,
Yeah.
I don't,
I mean,
understand
they're
your
using our
point, but,
streets, sure.
Yeah. That's the argument take the developers, yeah, you're subsidizing their parking needs. Okay, I agree, go ahead.
And in the 700 block, is any of that new construction, or is that all existing?
No, the 700 block is all
It's all
existing
existing.
construction, yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Anybody else want to ask me anything?
I don't think so. Thank you.
Okay,
Ms.
thank you.
Appreciate it. All righty. So we had a motion on the floor. Mr. Clerk, can you remind us of the motion?
I think the motion was simply to split the two, to consider these as two separate
Two separate
separate
items.
ordinances. So that's a separate motion, and was that Eric?
I think I seconded it.
Yeah, so that's just to split this up into 2 pieces.
So but I don't think we voted
You
on
haven't
that yet.
voted on that part yet,
All right.
yes. So that's just
So-
procedural.
So let's,
Maybe we ought to do that now, right? Just to
Yes.
get that over with.
yeah, that's what I was going to suggest. Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it. All right, so let's have a vote on the splitting of the motion of to divide the question. Thank you. So all in favor of dividing the question, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Ayes have it. So on the first question, as it relates to the, not the setback, we dealt with the parking.
Yeah.
What is the suggestion? Is there a motion for that? Alderman Roberts.
No.
Alderman Wu.
I'd love to discuss this, but I'd like to make a motion to deny, to deny the proposed zoning ordinance text amendment for the parking.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Motion by Alderman Wu, second by Alderman Hazen. Any further discussion? Alderman Brown.
Well, I'm concerned that in most cases, people renting single-bedroom units who don't have cars are paying for parking, either through their rent or, well, mostly through their rent, I guess, because very few of the places actually cost what it costs to provide the parking. They don't charge that separately. The city doesn't charge anything near what they would have to pay to provide a parking spot on private property. And that's probably something we should look at some point, but not under a zoning ordinance. So I'm concerned that anybody who doesn't have a car would be drawn toward units that don't have to provide parking, and most of those are in Champaign, so in a way we're kind of excluding people in that sense. But at the same time, I can see from the graphs and from Esther's argument that demand is there. It's clearly more than half a space per 1-bedroom unit, as far as I can tell. So I do think that if we wanted to do something in between, we could make it 0.8, 0.7, and you could calculate it out for 12 1-bedroom apartments at 0.7. You'd need to provide 8.4, so 9 spaces, about 3 for every 4 units. And I think that would be a reasonable approach. But that's just kind of I'm throwing that out there.
Alderman Roberts.
Right, right. I think that Bill is on to something here. We're looking at the difference between 1 and slashing it to a half or 0.5. And from the comments that Mr. Pat has provided to us, and I guess it's from the data itself, if the actual need is more like 0.67 or something like that, we could pass a different ratio. And we could choose that with a more appropriate, realistic ratio, which reduces the number of parking, so it helps the developers to some degree, but it doesn't create a shortage of parking. Would be to have a ratio like, as Bill said, 0.7. I was actually figuring 0.66. That's 2/3. And so for a one bedroom apartment, 0.66 is 0.66, and so it's you round it up to 1. Next time you look at 2, you get 1.32. You round it down to 1. And times three apartments, 0.66 becomes 1.98. So that becomes a solid 2, and you can keep going. And when you get to 10 apartment building times 6.6, you get 6.6. You round it up to 7. So you've already saved 3 parking spaces for a 10-unit complex, which is still providing extra parking, but not as much as the massive amount that's been required. So that's one way of handling, making a compromise, and meeting in the middle is often where you want to be.
Alderman Jacobson.
So in the notes that I made to myself as I was preparing for the meeting, I wrote that I would go for a ratio of moving from 1 down to 0.7 for 1-bedrooms. So it sounds as though there are a few people who are sort of thinking that, and I was mindful of the 0.62 that Esther, cited as, possibly evidence for that.
Alderman Miller.
So just for clarification, I do support Bill and Dennis's ideas of a compromise in between completely halving the requirement from 1 to a half. However, the motion on the floor is to deny the ordinance outright. And I think if we do so, we may discourage staff from even considering our suggestions. So maybe it's not wisest just to deny the ordinance outright, and so much as to send it back to council once more, even as aggravating as that may be, to consider a compromise between the half and the current 1.0 standard. And I would support that motion. I will not support a motion to deny outright, though.
Alderman Wu.
I have a question for staff in terms of if this would have to go back to the zoning commission if it was changed.
What I'm hearing is that it's in line with the request itself. It's specific to the number, so no, it would not have to go back because how we advertised the case was a reduction. So unless you're looking for an increase in the requirement, it would not have to go back.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I had looked at these numbers for a while, and I was going to make a couple of points, but I think everybody has kind of zeroed in on the main point, which is decreasing it to 0.5 is too low. Perhaps 1 is too high. Somewhere in the middle might actually work. If I just want to drive home one thing that I pulled out, which is if you look at the numbers on the apartment buildings with single-bedroom units only, if we did decrease it to 0.5, then that would mean that only 15 of the units out of 55 would actually have enough parking spaces. So that would mean that 72% of the buildings would not have enough parking spaces if built today under that requirement. So I'm hesitant to put a number on what I would agree to, what I would support, without actually knowing what the people who are living in these apartment buildings are actually needing. So it's difficult, I think, to come up with that number. I think most of the people here agree that it's higher than 0.5, but where it resides between 0.5 and 1, I'm not entirely sure without more information. And so that's what's left me with denying it. I am certainly open to asking staff to gather some more information. I realize it's a lot to ask because it's a lot of information to gather. But that's kind of where I stand right now.
Madam Mayor.
Well, I'd like to offer the perspective as a landlord who's rented property in West Urbana for close to over 40 years now. And I understand the reason that the staff asked landlords, because landlords tend to be present year after year, but I also caution you against basing your decision on a survey of tenants in any given year, because my experience shows the needs of tenants can vary drastically from year to year. Sometimes we're down to 1 duplex now, but we had 26 units at one time, and there were some years when people needed parking, and there were other years when out of 5 spaces at a building, only 1 space was occupied, and then they were inviting their friends to park there for the rest of the year. So 4 other people got a really good deal. So the snapshot if you set out to survey tenants, which also is going to be extremely time-consuming and difficult, you're not going to get an accurate picture. You really aren't, because tenants vary from year to year. They really do. So I caution you against asking staff to survey tenants.
All right, so the one point that I do think sticks out to me is if you make whatever changes we make in relationship to the parking, if whatever number we put on the apartments and duplexes, whatever that shortfall is, if we can't accommodate it with public parking or with the street parking, then we are creating a problem, right? So I am a little concerned about that. I thought at least that information, Kevin, would be extremely important for us to make a more informed decision, to at least see what we have as by way of public parking in relationship to the number that we set. So that's just all I would have on the discussion. So the motion on the floor is to deny, and so what do you all want to do? Any further discussion? Bill, Alderman Brown.
Since the maker of the motion seems unwilling to change it herself, I'll propose an amendment to the motion to change it to send it forward to council with recommendation for approval of 0.7 spaces per one-bedroom unit.
There's a motion by Alderman Brown. Is there a second?
I'll second the amendment, if that's appropriate parliamentary procedure, yeah.
All right. Do you accept that as a friendly amendment?
Come on, I'm smiling.
You are smiling, you are smiling. I will accept it as a friendly amendment. I might not vote for it, but I will accept it as a friendly amendment.
Okay.
Okay, so do I need a second then to that? This friendly amendment is
The
there.
seconder needs to accept that.
Oh, yes, I will, I'll accept that it's a friendly, that we have a friend.
Dean was the second.
No, it was Eric. It was
Dean was
Eric.
the second.
Oh, Dean was the second, okay, so you
Look a
do.
lot alike, I get it.
You accept it as a friendly amendment?
It's all good.
Okay.
So, the clarifying motion is that 0.7, 0.7, all right, 0.7, to be sent to council for recommendation for approval. All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Nay.
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 2 nays.
That's 3 nays.
3. Wow, close.
All right, so that motion passes, but I certainly would like to, I think it's going to be even closer next Monday if we do not have the clarifying information as it relates to the number of parking or the amount of parking that we have on the public spaces, so that we can see if we're making a wise decision. But thank you, Kevin. Thank you, everyone, for all the information.
Part 2.
Part 2 is the setbacks, but I thought we heard that we were going to, well, we broke it apart, and I thought that was because we wanted a motion to send this back to council, to keep it in committee.
Yeah, well, I don't think we had a formal motion, but I will move to keep this in committee for further consideration by staff on the issues that were raised during the discussion.
I'll second that.
All right, so it's been motioned by Alderman Jacobson, second by Alderman Miller, and there is discussion. Go ahead, Bill.
So it sounds like, I don't know, if we keep it in committee in the way people were talking about changing the caps, we'd have to go back to Plan Commission. So in the interim, it seems like a way to clarify what the rules we're currently operating under would be to just make a text amendment to the text amendment that says so the underlined portion currently says, if a development proposal includes demolishing existing buildings, those lots shall be considered as having the minimum front yard required in that district. We could change it to, those lots shall not be included in the calculation. So that would effectively use what's left over after the demolition to calculate the average.
Was that a motion?
You have a
An
motion
amendment.
on the
An amendment?
Well, I guess at that point it was a suggestion, willing to discuss it.
All right, Alderman Wu.
So I think there are 2 things. I agree with you. I think that one item that needs to be covered here is how the calculations are done for lots that are vacant or lots that are going to be torn down. And I agree with you. I think that it should be just basically a missing data point. It should be not used in the calculation. The second piece, which I think was the piece that Lori was talking about that had to go back to the zoning commission, was the 15 and the 20-foot range. And so I guess my question would be, how do we handle that? Do we still pass something that would count? Because these are two separate issues. How would that be handled?
Mr. Clerk?
You could send the Part 2 of the ordinance forward with an amendment as suggested by Mr. Brown, and add a direction to staff to direct the Plan Commission to investigate your modification of the minimum setback. And you could do it as one motion with, you could withdraw your motion or withdraw the motion to keep this in committee and then start over with a new motion from Mr. Brown.
Let me clarify this. So if we do this, then we actually won't take action on an ordinance at council. What we will do is send a request to the Plan Commission to consider these ideas.
No, you would go ahead and do the second part of the ordinance now with a proposed change with the text amendment change of the part that you can change now, that you can do now, and you would send a request to the staff to start the Plan Commission case to modify the minimum setback piece.
Okay.
You have two separate parts here.
Okay.
And
All right.
and so if your ultimate goal is the average setback piece, then you've accomplished it by going ahead and doing Part 2 of the ordinance.
So that's sort of interesting that for the council to send something to the Plan Commission, but I guess it's perfectly legitimate procedure.
It's okay.
Yeah, it's okay, okay.
Withdraw your motion.
I withdraw my motion.
All right. Alderman Brown, did you have something else?
So, I'm going to make a motion, right? Do people want me to make a motion? Okay, I'll make a motion. I'll move to send Part 2 of our divided motion to council with a recommendation for approval with the change. Those lots shall not be included in the calculation. Is that clear? Lori? Okay.
All right, I'd be happy to second that.
So moved by Mr.
I was going to say, if you're interested in, you're going to do a separate motion directing staff to go to the Plan Commission as a separate motion? Okay. Two separate motions, fine.
All right, so it's been moved by Mr. Brown, Alderman Brown, and second by Alderman Roberts. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
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 All opposed? All right, and the second motion?
And I'll move that we send the first part of the second part of the ordinance to the Plan Commission for further review on the ranges as they're listed.
I'll second.
Been moved by Mr. Miller, second by Alderman Wu. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The ayes have it. All right, so
Best part
just,
of the night.
yes, just again, to remind folks, to please come out tomorrow to the City of Urbana Human Relations Office. Traffic stop discussion will be hosted by Ms. Cecilia Clark and Mr. Preston James. There will be a presentation. Would that be by Melissa?
No.
No? Okay. So please come out, share your stories about any interactions or being stopped by the Urbana Police Department at the Urbana Civic Center.
In Urbana.
And being stopped in Urbana, regardless of where you live. If you got stopped in Urbana, come and talk to us tomorrow night from 6 to 8 p.m. at the Urbana Civic Center. We want to know your story and know how you feel about that and how it's impacting your daily lives. With no further business before this body, this meeting is adjourned.